turn with what time we have left to getting as much free assistance as we possibly can. I'm big on that. So let's start with, let's just start with the basic general. What are the most common mistakes that you see writers making in their drafts?
Well, one common mistake I see is they're not giving themselves enough time. They're trying to rush the process. The process does not like to be rushed, and it will never be rushed. And I can tell when somebody has actually taken the time to really put the work in versus when somebody is like, oh, I just got it out and now I'm sending it off. I got it out and I'm sending it off never works. We say that writing is really, really hard, but I always kind of feel like you just got to get the words on the page, and then it's really the revising that is what makes something sing. And the revising takes time. And part of the process of that time is not working on the project, is putting it aside and going and doing something else. Maybe it's doing a different project. Maybe it's going and taking a walk. Maybe it's going and painting your living room for a week and then coming back to it. And when you come back, you'll see with fresh eyes, you'll see all kinds of big picture issues popping out that just weren't there before. So I think rushing is definitely a problem. Going back to those 4 questions that I posed before, I'm finding quite often that when I'm editing, I suddenly step back and say, what's the plot here? Like, what's our actual arc? Because somewhere along the way in the writing, we lost it. So not taking writing is very much about going and looking at the teeny tiny little capillaries on the leaves and all the details, and then pulling back and looking at the whole forest. And you have to be able to go back and forth. And sometimes we forget that you have to take that step back too. And where we started in a story doesn't mean that that's where we ended in the final product or the at that moment product. So, taking the time to step back and assess that actually I kind of lost my way here is also a big problem.
And when you want to look at a writer's plot issues, do you prefer to get a summary from the writer up front that tells you this is the plot I think I've achieved? Or do you prefer to just get started, read what they've actually written, and then determine what the plot is? How accurate is the author's knowledge of their own plot a lot of times going in?
When people are querying me, they usually give me a little bit of a summary of their project. So I have kind of a sense of it. But I think for the most part, the plot issues end up coming out really as we're working. I can't always say that I can't honestly say that I've had an author characterize their book as entirely like one way, and then I read it and I'm like, that's not what we have here. I have had aspects of a story where that's really come out. And then, I've said, X, Y, Z, and they're like, oh, that's not what I intended at all. I intended this. I intended, J. And then I'm like, oh, okay. Well, if that's what you want, then here are some things to think about that might help you get there. And actually, I have a really great story about working with an author that's about when it's about that, but it's also about when to stand your ground as an author to protect your work, which I think is something that a lot of authors also are wary of when they're working with other people. It's very hard to open up yourself to the feedback from others. But I had an author, a very dear author who I worked with, who had a romance line in her novel, and it just wasn't really clicking. And I said to her, I I really want more banter between them. You know, we need more kind of build up. I want, you know, it needs to be more Elizabeth Darcy, Pride and Prejudice, for those who don't get the reference. We just like need him to be more Darcy. And she got really, really quiet on the phone. And then she came back to me and said, but he's not Darcy. And I was like, yeah, I know he's not Darcy, but you know, we need more of that like tension between them. And she's like, no, Alison, he's not Darcy. He's Knightley, reference to Emma, if viewers don't know what I'm talking about. And suddenly when she said that to me, that her intention was this kind of model who was wildly different from this other kind of model, I understood what she had wanted from him. And then I was able to step back and be like, okay, great. Let's think about these ways and maybe these specific places where you can then be building a better character to get him to that model. And I have to say that the end result of that was just kind of one of the most spectacular romances in the books I've edited.
And that author, of course, was Suzanne Collins. What an amazing story.
I only wish I had edited Suzanne Collins. But I think that points to how you can protect your work, but also get the most out of that collaborative experience. And how great that collaborative experience really can be as long as you're communicating well.